Hey, Composite Gloves here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this sound in Harmor. It sounds like this. And in the context of a track, it sounds like this. Okay, so let's get down to the sound design. This is using it's a pluck sound, it's a bass, and it's also a sort of a ride cymbal at the same time. And that's using resonance in this fashion. It used to be more common, but nowadays people just generally do layers. And so it's sort of a cool thing to be able to use your bass as the same thing. Like you wouldn't expect that they were the same sound, but they actually are. And regardless of the note I play, the pitch will be correct because the resonance sits at a particular value. This has some interesting properties. The general sound, if you want to make a sound like this sound, all you got to do is you got to make a pluck sound. And then you just embellish it using various offsets like delays and stereo effects and a little bit of distortion and reverb. So that's like the 1 second overview. That doesn't really tell you anything, but that's the general method. So I chose to use a volume knob to create my initial spike and go down in combination with a low pass movement that is being accomplished by the pluck sound. So if you open up a blank Harmor, so there's a whole bunch of pluck sounds, or like I could talk a long time about pluck sounds, but let's just be really general about it just so we understand some basic rules. So a pluck sound, a sound that has an initial impact and then it decays out. The way the frequencies go down in volume is going to determine how your pluck sound sounds. And we could get into really complicated things like phase changing over time and the acoustic environment interacting with it. But I think that's just like overcomplicating something that's really pretty simple. So for example, I'm able to take, here's the sound. I'm able to change its volume over time and tell it to get all frequencies get softer at the same rate. I am using an all-pass filter. That's what's going on here. When you see volume, it's just basically code for we're using an all-pass filter. All-pass filters can vary because of the method they choose to implement it and the way your sound might be generated in the first place, like Harmor's additively generated. So these can actually sound different across, but they all sound more or less like very similar. So all the frequencies are being told to turn down at the same rate. And you can see that there's an even decay in amplitude across the spectrum. If we go to a low pass, we can tell the low pass to do something like this, like that. So I'm doing it manually, but we have a way to do this automatically, and that's called a articulator. Basically, it uses an envelope. That's what it is. So an articulator, they call it that because this is an envelope that triggers every time you hit a key. So we are going to go ahead and tell the filter to turn down. So it's basically what I was just doing. It's going to do that here, and it's going to leave the lower frequencies alone. They're going to ring out longer than the higher ones. That's going to make it sound super different. And we could go the other way. That's like better for like kick sounds. So there you have it. That's how you can make a pluck with a filter. And you can augment it. Now you could maybe tell the middle frequencies to last longer and the higher frequencies to ring out and all these different deals. And we could even get into like how that might affect your ability to use reverbs and stuff. But that's like all stuff that's just not relevant to what we're going to talk about right now. So the other thing that you need to know to make this sound is we have a pluck knob here. This pluck knob has a special feature in Harmor, but in this case, I'm using it in this fashion. I want to use my filter frequency to control the resonance. I have a second filter, but they also provide me with this pluck knob. And what it does is basically what I just did right here. Now, they determine the way it's going to turn off. You're actually able to change this and be really specific with it and its own articulator. And they also have some controls in mapping on a per harmonic basis because it's additive. So there's this is like a crazy knob, but we are not going to deal with it. You can actually configure the filters to do really specific things in Harmor. So one of the reasons why it's so powerful. But basically, it's shaving the high frequencies off, letting the low ones ring out longer. So that's what you need to know about pluck sounds. So here we go. I'm choosing to use those two methods. That gets me a particular aesthetic that I enjoy. Now, let's turn off the effects here. Off, 0, 0. That's pretty much what you have. Now I'm playing low. I'm playing an octave of down an octave. So whatever notes I'm playing, they get played down an octave. This actually turns out to be pretty important for this sound. But just by writing in a different range, this can change. This has a bigger impact as we add effects. You'll see what I mean, because later on it'll sound like junk. I also have a couple moves here that don't really matter. Don't worry yourself about them. This harmonizer doesn't matter. Ignore it. And the same thing with the detune. They're there because I was trying things and they didn't sound that great, but I didn't change them all the way back. And so they're at these settings now. Also, my sub is turned on. So what this does is it introduces a tone an octave lower than my lowest tone. And that's what's going on right there. So basic harmor stuff, as well as the saw wave. Okay, so we understand our pluck sound and we understand how we're generating it. We're using a combo move of this. And now this is, I didn't choose this specifically so I could turn down all the frequencies at the same rate, because then it sort of defeats the purpose of this. And you can see this is still pretty much working. So it might be going, what's the purpose of this really? It's so that it rings out, because if I have this off, it just stops. And so when I hit a note, so I wanted to have it so that when I hit a note, it goes all the way. So I just tap my note and the whole thing sounds. This is so that when I release my note, it jumps to this part of the envelope and releases out. So I get my full sound out. So that's why this guy is on in the grand scheme of things. I also left my phaser on, but we'll talk about what that has, because at this stage, it doesn't really play that much of an effect or a role. So the first thing is I'm making my sound, and I discover that I want to use my my filter to create a resonant tone, because as a bell tone. It actually was an accident, because I was trying to make another bass and I came across this and found that I liked it, so I ran with it. What it is you can use the filter. If I were to play this, I'm actually able to change my filter as it moves around. And if I turn on everything else again, we get some pretty cool properties. It just sounds nifty as it goes through. So that's something I really could have capitalized on more, but decided not to. Okay, so I went through there, and this filter is doing that, and I'm using this to control the shape of the pluck. And so that's what's going on there. I really encourage you to mess with this, because it's a really cool idea. The resonance, if you're unfamiliar with resonance, it is a boost in the cutoff frequency. So wherever my cutoff value is, that is where my resonance will reside. So using this to control the shape of the overall spectrum is important, because I can't be moving this knob around. Otherwise, I'll have like my resonance moving around and it won't stay at the correct note. So it's a separate deal. I have a second filter. I just didn't use it. So, okay, that's what's going on there. Now, I have a number of effects going on. At this point, it's all embellishment. And this sounds quite a bit different than when I had everything off, right? So let's add one effect at a time. So one of the most severe effects I have is the distortion. So right now it sounds like that. When I add my distortion, I used a bit crusher, and bit depth has a direct relationship to the amount of noise in your signal. And so I add this with the intention to add noise. You might be going, why would you want to do that? Well, when I combine it with my reverb, it gets this sort of airy lo-fi vibe, and that was what I was going for. So bit crushers are really cool for that reason. When you combine it with the delay and a couple other effects, it gets a little filled out and becomes more like the noise, because this sound of noise is typical of bit crushers. It gets a little more filled out and gets a little more like white noise, but maintains the profile of a bit crusher noise, and it just basically acts as a pad to lay down a foundation for the track. Just takes up some space, makes it feel a little more full. So it's got asymmetry on, which it just basically adds a little more quirks to the sound. The amount's not all that huge. The filter, all this stuff, pretty typical stuff. The wet is very small, but it plays a large role in a texture sort of viewpoint. So then I add a delay, and this is a big deal. I immediately get a stereo image. You might be going, it doesn't sound like a delay. It's not like dun, dun, dun. This is what's called a Hawes effect delay. I actually have videos on this, so you can go check those out. But what essentially is happening is this time knob has been moved. It's been moved a very, very, very small amount. I'm using it in the range where you cannot detect discrete delays. So it doesn't sound like dun, 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 dun. You know, like there's not delays after you have something like an echo. This is instead a very, very short delay. And what's happening is I have the stereo offset on. So the sound begins in one speaker and immediately jumps to the other speaker so fast that you can't detect it. Instead, it creates a sense of space. And that is what is going on here. You can get into debates about like monocompatibility and stuff over moves like this, but in this case, it's a more or less subtle move. It just adds space, widens the sound out, gives me room, which is an important thing in this track. So I do that, and then I added a unison at the order of 2. What unison? I mean, not unison. I added a chorus. Very different things. Unison is additive. Chorus is not. So what the chorus does is it clones your output and makes subtle changes to it. And so here, this is a very, very subtle chorus. Like most of this stuff is pretty much off. It's just something small. It's similar to these moves, not really that important. Okay, so that's the chorus. Nothing really crazy there. The reverb, I just turned the reverb on. I did filter stuff out because I was making room for other things. So that's why the filters are up a little bit. And the decay has been brought up. It has not an incredibly long delay, but it's there. If you listen to like the upper mids, like those go on for quite a while. It takes on like a metallic texture, and that's something that I really found enjoyable. And then the unison. This compounds the delay effect in that the delay is creating this field, and unison is adding to that. So this is cloning it twice, and this is cloning it twice. And according to the order back here, so first we reach our chorus, I don't know what I'm talking about right now. The chorus is duplicating what my unison is creating. So unison clones the voice of harmony. So one voice, right? We have all these harmonics being generated, and then when I have unison 2 on it, it's making a second voice. And it runs against the first, creates a whole bunch of interesting phase relationships, and my panning offset's very, very, very small. So it adds a small depth of field, and according to panning, there's a large pitch variation, though, which adds a substantial amount of sort of noise, helping the bit crusher do its job. And I found a phase relationship that I found enjoyable. I'm not going to get into the specifics of what unison does. You can go check it out in the Harmor from the Ground Up series. Now, at this point, with all these effects on, this begins to have a much bigger implication. So if I go down an octave, or up an octave, I'm sorry, versus, that's like just a lot more full down. And it's just a choice of where you want to play. But now it's like before it didn't have as large an effect as this does now. If I go down one, that's like way too low. And so all these things. It's largely because of this sub knob. But I want that extra harmonic down there. So yeah, you can just choose to write in a different range. And that could be that simple as well. Whatever floats your boat. And then at the end here, we also have a phaser. And this phaser, what it does is if you listen, you can hear it really closely. You hear it mostly in the way it interacts with the verb, the way it generates the reverb. So as I play it, you can hear the verb going, and then going back down, and that's a product of the phaser, and it just makes it so that it never sounds quite the same. There's something a little bit off about the sound. And that's how you make this sound. That's a lot of the ideas that went into this. So let's go ahead. Let's make something similar. Maybe not the exact same sound, but let's go ahead, give it a shot. So here we have a harmor. Very loud. Okay, and let's go ahead and make our pluck sound first. So first, I want to make sure that I have a general contour, meaning the amount of volume. I want it to be something that is of a pleasing length. See, like that release is way too long, so we're gonna maybe a little more sharp. Now I'm gonna use my pluck knob to shape it further. Oh, this is a little misleading. That's the previous harmor. Here, I opened this up. Okay, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a pluck knob. I'm going to bring it down an octave and bring up my sub. Maybe make this a lot more severe. So already pretty cool. Now we are going to let's add in our effects next. So let's come in here and let's go for our delay. So that's way too long, right? So we're going to move this timer so that, turn this way up. I want this, you got to hold down Alt or Control, Alt, just Control, Shift. Shift is what lets you do the small values. No, it's not. It's control. I can't remember right now. We're going to go to 01 though. So really close, and we're going to move the stereo offset just a hair up. We're going to move the feedback up. So without it, with it. So you see, there we go. Oh, we got our delay in place. Now we will add the unison. I'm going to go to 2. That's what it sounds like right now. It's a little too wide. That's why I took my panning down. And so this is where this is a lot more obvious. As I move this around, it's changing the phase relationship between the 2 voices that I am now creating. And some of them are very undesirable. Let's see. But that one sounds pretty cool. So I'm going to sit with that one. The original was fine too. Take my chorus up. So this is just another subtle thing. We're creating our space. And then I had these weird moves over here. I'm not going to bother with them this time. We'll add the verb now. Bring them down. Now, let's create our resonance tone. And, oh yeah, this is something I didn't talk about. The oscillator turns that on. So this is the volume of that. And then the offset controls how far down it is from wherever the cutoff value is. We're able to offset it. So then you'd find a note that you find enjoyable. And okay, let's add in our bit crusher. You see, that's like way too crazy. Turn the asymmetry up. I think I may have put this very near the beginning of the chain in the advanced tab or after. That's another topic entirely. Let's come over here. This is one that I'd have to look back at the original. Bit crush. Oh, it's the mix knob. There we go. It's just something in the background. If we put it near the beginning, it'll run through everything, and that'll really help it sort of wash out. And so we'll mess with this, make it fit. And yeah, so that's generally what we're going for. We also have the portamento on, so we can do stuff like this. And away you go. You have a somewhat similar sound. It's not quite the same. It's going to tinker to make it fit the track. This was definitely a sound that was created according to what I thought would fit my track the best. We also had our phaser on. So now we get that going on. And so... let's turn up our harmonizer now. So the harmonizer, what it's going to do is it's going to add some higher harmonics. That's all I really think about it as in this sort of a context. But anyways, yeah, so it's not quite the first sound, but it has the similar guidelines. And then as you write your track, you'll find things that you specifically want to do, and you'll make changes to make it fit. Let me just double check here. There's no post-processing on this sound, so something that's kind of cool. No EQ, just letting it ring out the way it sounded in the first place. And now my tuning's all wrong because I've messed with these settings. But anyways, that's that. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.